So my name is Mitch with Organized Binder. Some of you know me. And I think what's going to be most helpful, and we offered one of these sessions last week as well. I know some of you signed up and then weren't able to make it, so I'm glad to see you here. I'm going to give a quick intro on how Organized Binder is used daily, as quick as I can. And then the focus of this webinar is just really how you can use it in a remote learning environment and focusing on some of the digital curriculum. So hopefully that's helpful. So what we've seen is a number of, started off when we went into shelter in place. About week 2 or 3, we started hearing from families who were, as was already mentioned, kind of just starting to get buried. Because some districts have gone all online, others are sending home packets, there's consumables, et cetera. And I'll talk about that in a moment, but just looking for some basic organization. So we offered our table of contents, which I'll talk about today, for free for families. And this week we offered up our goal setting template, just trying to help out. So I'm hoping this will give you some context and then how it can be very simply modified to work in a remote environment. And I'm going to turn that off. Okay. So what this really is all about, and don't worry, I'm not going to read a bunch of slides to you here, but in moving to college and career readiness, we must now teach some skills formerly learned by students on their own. All students need lessons of modeling, study work-life time management, or task management, note-taking, and assignment completion strategies. What is kind of the core of Organized Binder is really giving students exposure to and practice with non-cognitive skills or executive function. Basically, one of the schools we work with call it studentness. It's basically all the stuff you need to be able to do to be successful really with any content. So as we roll through this, I hope that you see that Organized Binder is a content agnostic tool, meaning it can be used in any subject area and at almost any grade level, okay? And this is kind of the research that's the underpinning of it, is helping students develop the non-cognitive skills, strategies, attitudes, and behaviors that are the hallmark of effective learners. And if we do so, teachers can improve student learning, course performance, but also increase the likelihood that students will be successful in college. And we can back that up and look at an elementary implementation, and it's really about helping them be successful and prepared for middle school, or from middle school to high school, et cetera, those large transitions. What makes this different, and Organized Binder does not have, say, a lesson on goal setting or a lesson on organization that you would kind of teach to students. Instead, it creates a very predictable rhythm to the student's school day, whether that be at home, whether that be in a traditional classroom. It just creates this kind of predictable rhythm, and by virtue of that rhythm or routine, students get exposure and practice with these skills. And if you haven't read this book, it's a great one to pick up. But I love this quote because one of the biggest ironies is that many of the tools that are likely to yield the strongest classroom results remain essentially beneath the notice of our theories and theorists in education. Consider one unmistakable driver of students' achievement: carefully built and practiced routines. So just creating that predictability for students. This is an Organized Binder, as you can see, and there's some color-coded tabs. Each of those tabs are just a quick reference for the various aspects of Organized Binder. And what I'm going to do today is just look at the elements that are used every day and not those that are used periodically. At the end of this very short webinar, I'm going to put up a simple link that if you want to learn more or continue the conversation personally with me, you can do so. Just a simple request, send your name and email, and we'll follow up with you, okay? So the typical rhythm and sequence to a class or a work day, if we're going to look at the remote environment, is we start with something called the weekly lifeline. And don't worry, I'll blow all these up so you can see them a little better. And we kind of have this rhythm, this B page, this green C page, the table of contents, which is G, possibly this academic toolkit, and then we end back on this weekly lifeline. So this is just kind of how we would begin the school day, or if you're teaching individual class periods, the beginning and into those. And in between that time is when you would typically teach your class, or in a remote environment or an independent study environment, a student's work session. And I highlight that to say that if it is a classroom context, teachers can implement this program and really do what they do already. So we're not going to change the way you deliver content. We're just going to utilize the first few minutes and last few minutes of the class period. And we can talk more about that in a little bit, but it's good to note that you can remain individual. So here's what I've seen, and I'll tell you a little bit about me real quick. I'm a 20-year veteran high school teacher. I spent 18 years at a school in last school year, so I'm a year and a half, or almost, I guess, the end of 2 years at a new high school, and I transitioned to an online independent study program. And little did I know, it would serve to really be a prep for what we're experiencing right now, because I took Organized Binder, which is this analog physical binder that you're using in a classroom, and implemented it with my students who are working independently, and all of their content is digital. And that's kind of, for a lot of us, where we are now with remote learning. And it works seamlessly. And one of the things I really like about it is that my students are all issued a Chromebook. And I just started referencing their Chromebooks. It's the new textbook. That's how you're going to access a lot of what we learn in this class. But my first year, we didn't use Organized Binder, and all my biology students got to the end of the class, into the school year, and biology ended, and they had nothing to show for it. Even if they were successful in the class, it went away. It's all housed up in the cloud somewhere, and they don't even have access to it if they're not logged in, and certainly once they leave the school. And my fear with this remote learning environment we're in right now, if it's all digital, the same thing's going to happen. Where's the evidence of my learning? And so I'll show you how I kind of wove it in. But first, this is how it happens in a regular classroom. I would have this projected for a student or for a class, and they would walk into my classroom. And this would be a nonverbal visual cue that in order to be considered on time, you just need to be in your assigned seat with your binder, your Organized Binder, open to this weekly lifeline. I'd wait for class to start, and we always start with this a kickoff. And I want to explain what that is real quick, or why we use that terminology, because this is nothing new, right? It's a question of the day, bell rung, seat work, whatever you want to call it. But we call it a kickoff on purpose, because the way we explain it to students is you would never show up to, let's say, a soccer game and take to the field and start the game based on when you showed up to the field. Instead, you would show up, you would get your cleats on, you would stretch out, you would warm up with your team, you would wait for the other team to do the same and the refs to get there. And then at some point, you get in your position, and then we start. That there's this prep time. So I know when I'm ready to begin the game. And the same needs to be true for learning, that we don't jump in and engage the moment we show up to class, or maybe when we show up to school, but there's this time of getting ready, and we have this discrete time where we start. And in a remote learning environment, I'm going to keep coming back to this, what I'm seeing is true with my students in independent study is it kind of devolves down into just getting through my to-do list. So I sit down, I'm getting to work on my schoolwork, and I just get through my stuff. This is meant to be a moment where we pause and we reflect on whatever the goal or the standard or the objective from the previous time I saw you, if I'm a classroom teacher, or the previous time I was engaged in this subject if I'm working remotely or independently. Students record this prompt and respond to it. And each day that they're engaging in the content of this course, we always start with a reflection. So if this was a classroom context, and this is, you can see it says B5, in an organized binder, they would have 18 of these per semester. This would be the 5th week. And if, let's say the end of the first unit was happening here at the end of this 5th week, they could have 25 standards aligned prompts with responses that they could use to learn to study as they're preparing for that unit exam, okay? This is a typical classroom implementation. I'm just going to show you this. We may not go through the whole thing, but listen. This is before, and you'll hear the bell ring. You'll see students right now kind of mingling, getting ready, the teacher hounding a couple of them, and then they start class with a kickoff.
No, she just started yesterday.
So they're kind of just getting ready, getting themselves set up.
A 1,000 bond earns simple interest, 6%. What is the interest earned after 4 years? The same formula we used yesterday is going to help us with this problem.
Okay, so not going to spend a whole lot of time there, but I hope you notice just kind of the affect shift. They're engaging. She gets a chance to review and reteach the previous day's concept or standard. And students get a chance to get their misconceptions cleared up and reflect on that. It's really a time for direct instruction. Can be used however you like. Students are recording that. By the way, that's one of our trainers up in Redding in Northern California. I think that's a 6th grade class. Students are recording that prompt. And it's not meant to be a quiz. This is just like I said, a reflection, a way to get started. So it could be collaborative, again, if this is in a classroom environment. And we mark the end of this reteach with this checkbox. And students simply write 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 when they reflect on this prompt. And 1 being I'm lost, 5 is that I'm totally got it. And it's a simple moment of metacognition, of self-assessment. You saw how the teacher was walking around the classroom and she's just getting a quick formative glance, a snapshot at how all of her students are doing each day when she's starting class. And in a remote, let me show you now how I do this in an independent study or a remote or digital learning environment. You can see that second circle there. This is in the first unit. There was an assignment to set up your binder. So you take out all the parts of your organized binder, you put it all together. And then there's a kickoff prompt. And so I can pass out that question in the same way you saw it in the classroom, but I can deliver it digitally. And so what it encourages teachers to do in this remote learning environment is not just deliver lists of things to do, but start to think about and formulate actual daily lesson plans that are just very simple. Here's what I needed you to get last time. I'm going to prompt you tomorrow on that, and you're going to respond to it. And it's okay if you're still struggling with it. Students just simply can take a picture of these, like here's a kickoff, and upload it, share it, however that's happening with the teacher's school in a digital environment. Okay, you can see here's a kickoff. It doesn't always have to be words. It can have to draw pictures, etc. Just this moment for me to make sure I'm clearing up your misconceptions and you got it. So they take a picture, upload it, put it back in their binder, and now they're starting to create this portfolio of their learning. We would typically then, in a classroom, we would do a kickoff, check yourself. We would update the agenda, which I'll talk about in a moment, the table of contents. But since we begin and end on this weekly lifeline, I just want to talk about how we would end a work session or in the class day. The kickoff is a reflection time of what we did previously. The learning log is a simple reflection on what we've done today. Okay, so you jump into your to-do list, you're getting everything done, and then at the end, can you articulate what you're learning, or maybe even what confused you in your own voice, your own words? We have a series of guides, some for educators, others for parents and tutors. And in those guides, there's many examples of these prompts if you're working with a student to try to get them to that kind of metacognitive place. Because what students tend to do is they tell you what they did. All right, today I learned about this. Well, you want to get them beyond that, and we can talk more about that in a deeper training. But we begin and end the school day or the class period or the work session with reflection. And I'll talk a little bit about why that is. In the sake of time, I'm going to draw your eyes to the last sentence here. Elaboration is the process of giving new material meaning by expressing it in your own words and connecting it with what you already know. Instead of just finishing what I've got done and moving on to something else, having students pause and can you articulate what you're learning in your own words and connecting it with what you already know. That's that learning log piece. This is my educational hero. Liberating education consists in acts of cognition, not transfers of information. And I fear, again, this remote environment that we're pushing all of this information out to students or content out to students without building in a rhythm that gives them time to think about it and process it and articulate it, which is really important. One of the caveats with this learning log, as well as the kickoff, is that you practice academic language. So you're not texting me or Snapchatting me or emailing me even. You are practicing grammatically correct, complete sentences in English. And now when students are engaged just with this simple beginning and ending routine, they're getting practice with English language development, using academic language regardless of the subject area context, which is important. And then this is the whole point here with this beginning and end, and it's Marzano's work around just exposing students multiple times. So you have to retrieve it. You have to go back and find what you've learned, work with it, articulate it, put it back. So if I give a lesson, that's the first exposure. And at the end of class, I'm going to prompt you to reflect on what you're learning in that lesson. And then when you come back to me 24 hours later, the first thing I do with a kickoff prompt is expose you once again, take you back to that content. So that we're just by virtue of how we start the school day or the work session, increasing those times that we interact with the material, okay? So that's the beginning and ending of class or a work session. We reflect. And then we gotta make a plan. And this just takes a moment. And that's our agenda, which is section C in Organized Binder. And I wanna talk about this specifically for a class or a specific subject that we can talk about a larger calendar, but for this, the reason we call this an agenda and not a calendar is it's just for this class. It's what I'm doing. What's my game plan today? Do I have one? What am I going to get accomplished? And in articulating that, oftentimes in a remote setting, this is at first encouraged and supported with parent involvement, but simply making a plan. Here's what we're going to do. Now, homework, we have to adjust that for the situation we're in now because there's clearly no homework. But looking at my things to do, if it is delivered digitally, I want students to take a moment and pick out any larger upcoming assignments and put it on their agenda so they know it's coming. So they're not just in the moment, like doing what I need to do today, okay? And then as we're going through, they're setting a plan each day. They could also use, we have planners, other schools have planners where you could look at kind of a week view or a month view where we're starting to incorporate other classes. But just having students pause for a moment and think about, okay, I've reflected and now I've made a plan. Here's what I'm going to accomplish today in this class. And then take a moment to get organized. This is the table of contents. I think some of you have downloaded it and maybe tried it with your own children or students. But this is a simple way to organize all of the content in a specific unit of curriculum in a class. So as I go through this, you can see if you just glance, all of those or many of those are different types of assignments, okay? But they all belong in this unit. So in Organized Binder, there's not a section for notes and a section for homework or worksheet or quizzes or essays. It's all about capturing a teacher's thematic unit lesson plan. Every teacher I've ever met anywhere in the country and beyond now we all teach through units of curriculum. And so we want to capture that. So each day, if you follow that date column, when students sit down to do some work, and I'll just back up real quick, if it was the 14th, this is the one thing that would be added to their table of contents. If you were in my class and you showed up on the 15th, after we've updated our agenda, we would update this. And we're just adding to this each day that we're engaged in the classwork. And all students do is they write that number in the upper right-hand corner of the assignment. Now, for some districts I had mentioned, um, that we work with Organized Binder, sent home packets of curriculum. They kind of took a week and put a bunch of stuff together so that they could deliver something and not only rely on the internet. Others didn't do that. And this is, I want to bring this up for my particular class. Every Organized Binder has a semester 1 and a semester 2 packet that goes inside. And each of those has 50 sheets of lined binder paper. And so I can have, if I don't have a consumable, or if I don't have a printer readily available at home, or I haven't mailed anything home, all of my students can still, at the very least, be taking Cornell notes, practicing that skill as they're going through the lessons that are delivered online. So they're populating their table of contents with, depending on the class, whatever is available to them. And as we're progressing through the unit, if you look here in my class, again, these are screenshots from my class, Cornell notes, okay, and vocabulary, lesson 1 Cornell notes. What's mostly in their binder is notes and vocabulary. It's things that they're physically generating as they're working with the curriculum online. And when we get done with this table of contents at the end of a unit, I love this about this system, so we create a unit packet. We staple that together so that each unit has its own unit packet. And these are 2 of my students back when we were in the classroom, studying for a college-style cumulative final exam with everything they've done in my class from day 1 till this day in June, neatly curated in thematic, very accessible unit packets. Okay, so we're building robust resources for them to use to learn to study from. So they have all of their content curriculum all organized there, and then think about all of those kickoff questions and responses that they can use as well to study for a unit and also summative or final exams. All of their work, all of these unit packets goes back in their Organized Binder at the end of the school year, and they leave your class, or even in a remote setting like with me, they finish the class with a portfolio that they take with them. And this is really important because it really is kind of like a trophy for them. If you can see the like joy on these students' faces, and we don't have time for me to tell you the background of some of these students, but there's something about that physical, hands-on, tactile portfolio. And here's the thing, everybody's doing it. You could have a A in the class and be that student, or you could be struggling to keep up and have a C or a C minus, but you still get practice with all of these skills. You're still a part of the rhythm, and you're still creating your portfolio. So you have that trophy. Whereas again, in a remote environment, if it is all delivered digitally, one, we're not even talking about access issues, who has reliable internet access, but you get done and there's nothing to show for it. So I'm a real believer in this tactile, hands-on portfolio. And there's one more piece in our daily rhythm we may not look at every day, but it's the toolkit. How am I empowering my students to be successful? Of course, daily and in my unit lesson plan, but throughout my whole course, and that's the academic toolkit. And anything here, it could be an assignment that they get credit for, it could be a resource I give to them or that they create. But these are things that we're going to access and use throughout the entire course, throughout the school year, or in a college context, throughout the semester, where I'm just going to reference back to these or add to them. So I don't want them trapped in one of those unit packets. They need to be readily available. So we're building this toolkit to really empower students to be successful in my class. Where do my tools go? And there's an important distinction here that this makes for students, is that everything they create or receive from a class isn't all just work. It's not all just the same thing. That some of this, oh, I need to set this over here because I'm going to come back to it. It's that important. If I'm in a science class, like for me, we're always going to be talking about and creating hypotheses. You need your Cornell notes on the scientific method so you can reference it. So that's the idea of the toolkit. You may or may not access that every day, but this is the rhythm. Before you start the school day and in a remote environment, before you start your work session, begin with the reflection. create a plan, get yourself organized, open up your toolbox. Is there anything in there you're going to need to be successful today? And then get to work. Then start class. Then start this, whatever that looks like. And then when we finish, instead of just closing up and running out, once again, begin or end the work session or school day with a reflection. A very simple routine that's going to help students retain what they've learned, but more importantly, maybe give them exposure and practice with all of these skills. The other aspects that are not used daily, there's a goal setting template, an organizational check, so a binder check to make sure everything's going back where it belongs. It's a place for your syllabus, and then the passes. And I'll just very quickly talk about these. I have about 1 minute. Can't go into the context here, but this is so important in a remote learning environment, especially now that we've been at it a while. What's your bearing? Okay, what that's the blog post I put up today and shared, is that what are you aiming for, and what's the action item? How do you get there? What's that daily task? And in a deeper training, we go into all of this, that whole idea of goal setting. This is the binder check, just making sure periodically every 3 or 4 weeks that your binder is organized and you're not stuffing things in a backpack like this, or on horizontal surfaces in your room if you're in a remote learning environment. It all goes in the organized binder. Again, there's a place for a syllabus. Passes, these, just to give you some context, in a classroom setting. These are not nurses' passes. This is about the skill of self-control. I'll give you 3 of these per term. Any that are unused, what most teachers do say is this is worth 1 extra credit assignment, each one of them. So that, do I really want to use them? Do I not? So just giving them a chance with kind of that self-control. Take a screenshot. You can always get a hold of us via the website. This is me. That's our phone number, of course. And pretty much any social channel. We're not super active, but it's going to be at Organized Binder. I'll come back to this screen in 1 moment because I want to end with Dweck, that simply raising standards in our schools without giving students the means of reaching them is a recipe for disaster. It just pushes the poorly prepared or poorly motivated students into failure and out of school. So we're trying to equip them by giving them exposure to these skills. All right, I'm 1 minute over. I'm going to jump out of that. I'm going to leave that up there if you want to grab my contact information. I don't see any chats. Let me see here. I'm going to share one thing. If you would go ahead and open up your chat window. We'll go back here. These kind of 30-minute crash course sessions are strange because I'm not really chatting with you, but I would love to hear further from you. That's a simple form that will let me know if you're interested in slowing down, diving deeper into each of these aspects of the system, or if you're wanting to know more about the other elements of the system, the goal setting, the things that are used periodically. If you want to talk about this in an elementary or middle school or high school, or if you happen to be a college instructor, or if you want to dive deeper in this remote, I would love to hear from you. So just use that simple form, and I'll just pass along an email to you personally, and we can set a time for a phone call or a follow-up webinar, etc. So any questions for me? And you can say them out loud if you would like. Feel free to turn videos on. But you don't have to. I'm going to wrap here in just a moment. Any comments, questions? I know some of you have used the system before.
I know I use it and I still use it and I miss it being at home. My kids are funny, like it's so ingrained in my